Hello, welcome to episode 5 of our Doctor Who rewatch retrospective thing.
You haven't picked a name yet.
Yeah. We so skillfully dodged around that on the previous 4 episodes. Yeah.
You just made it very apparent in your introduction that you didn't know what the show was called. Anyway, so I'm Aaron, he's Rob.
Yes. And this is a show about Doctor Who.
Which is a show about a time traveller.
Anyway, so the second part of the first Slitheen episode story in Series 1, World War 3. The bit I really want to talk about is the end, but I feel like we should cover the main bit of the story first.
So I think on the whole this was a massive improvement. Definitely a case of lots of dominoes being set up in the first part, and because of that it's not super interesting, and this is just knocking them all over. Like this, I thought it kind of flew by, especially in comparison to the first episode, which dragged a little bit. This was just one thing after the other, and I think the main thing that stood out to me is the tonal problems were completely sorted.
Entirely.
The Slitheen were cranked up to 11, and everyone around them was taking things much more seriously, in terms of like, they were
basically exactly what we were talking about in the first in the last episode.
Exactly. But they're bobbling around in their costumes and their mouths are sort of flapping open, and Rose and Harriet are cowering in fear behind them. I was like, perfect, absolutely perfect.
I was not surprised that this episode was better, but I was surprised by how much better it is. I struggle to actually pick much flaw with this episode. I think tonally it works a lot better. Like you say, it leans much more comfortably into these are kind of ridiculous aliens. It has some great little comedic bits, like the where they're all going upstairs and getting undressed, going through the changing rooms, and she's taking their skin suits and putting on clothes hangers. That's really very funny, and tonally just right.
Perfectly camp, because no one within that scene is acknowledging that this is strange. They're just like, well, we're hanging up the skin suits on the coat hangers.
Obviously, you hang up the skin suits on the...
exactly. That's spot on.
And that is exactly, I think, what we were talking about in the previous episode of... If you're doing camp to do camp, the people in the camp shouldn't be treating it as though it is camp. I said camp a lot there.
You did.
But a much more fun episode, I think. You had good one-liners. You had, it was an episode that they're clearly having a lot of fun with.
There was just so much more happening.
Yes.
And I don't want to sound like some sort of simpleton who's like, oh, I need action to be engaged, but obviously I don't, Blink is a great story, very little action in that, but the non-actiony stuff wasn't working. No. This episode has lots of Scooby-Doo chases through hallways
literally
with horribly CGI'd aliens, and the costumes, I think they're very good in how they look, but they don't move very convincingly. I think it's very clear the people in them are struggling to puppeteer them, but I think crucially the episode doesn't let that stop them from getting them to move around a lot, which is very quintessentially Doctor Who, I think, where it's like, oh, we don't have the budget for this, screw it, let's just do it anyway.
It's not like, oh, we're going to be held back by, oh, this maybe doesn't look totally... I mean, the Slitheen, the practical Slitheen's in and of themselves look fantastic, but like you say, they are clearly quite restricted for movements. The CG Slitheen's, obviously, they allow them to do the movement a lot more. The problem really, this is getting into sort of, the slightly technical side of it, but the problem with the CG Slitheen's in terms of what makes them not look great is they're much too shiny. Yes. They're too specular. They haven't got much texture, and that is unsurprising for television special effects on a low budget at that time. But for this, it's a bit like you've said it a few times before, that if it's kind of a wacky episode anyway, it doesn't take you out of it. It's funny to watch, and so it kind of takes you out in that sense, but it's not, because the episode itself is clearly not taking itself that seriously. You're not taken out of it in a bad way. It just contributes to the sort of slight ridiculousness of the episode.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this episode hit the mark in terms of like the silliness and the camp and the fun, which is clearly what Rusty Davies is more comfortable writing when he's doing Doctor Who episodes. So it was just so much more enjoyable for that, and the Slitheen were hamming it up a lot more. But somewhat paradoxically, I think it also did the domestic side of things, and this whole idea of, you know, how Jackie and Mickey are responding to Rose travelling with the Doctor. I think it actually did that way better than the first episode as well, which is sort of strange. You'd assume that one would come at the expense of the other.
I think maybe it's sort of because the episode sits more comfortably with itself. It is then kind of able to integrate those more serious, because the thing that I thought was interesting when I was watching it, because immediately I was like, yes, I think this episode works better than the first part, but it's not that it completely dispenses with serious scenes. There are still serious scenes in it, but they're kind of integrated within the so I caught a fly. That's why I was.
I was looking at you like, do we acknowledge that, or do we just move on?
The serious scenes are kind of integrated because the episode just generally sits with itself more comfortably, and so it kind of gets through the episode without feeling like these are the serious sections, these are the campy sections, but it doesn't undercut the serious sections by having camp in the serious sections. The serious sections are not camp.
Yeah, I think you completely hit the nail on the head there, because the episode knows what it's doing a lot more. The seriousness, it feels so much more genuine and more like sincere, and it just works a lot better.
And ultimately they do actually expand on the themes more of the domestic element. There's not, we kind of had that critique in the first part of they start to sort of do the domestic things and then they just divert away from it, and it's the plot. Here it is much more. I mean, really, this episode is about the domestic. Like, the Slitheen are fun. I mean, it's similar to Rose in that regard.
Exactly, yeah.
The Ortons are silly, but they serve largely as a backdrop for the point of the episode, which is introducing the characters and all the rest of it. The point of this episode is the conflict of Rose being committed to travelling with the Doctor, the impact that has on her family, the way they react, and all the rest of it.
And I think in that sense it's very clever that the episode is structured in such a way that Jackie and Mickey are still involved in the action, because the Slitheen comes knocking, and that's a really good way to sort of bring them into and build lots of tensions around that.
Yeah.
But the sort of final sacrifice decision is taking place away from them, so it's only affecting Rose, which is a good kind of metaphor for Rose is off doing this with the Doctor, so she could just die at any moment.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good microcosm of that of that problem.
Dynamic.
Yeah, which is exactly the problem Jackie has with the Doctor.
Yeah, and
that's well structured in that sense.
Because they get the Slitheen, they get an exposure to how mad and how dangerous that world is. And obviously for them, because they're not Rose, they don't deal with it well. They're not Jackie very clearly gets no enjoyment from being hunted by the Slitheen, whereas Rose, obviously she's in peril and she's trying to escape danger and stuff, but there's always that underlying, she is an adrenaline junkie.
I absolutely adored the line when Jackie is talking to Mickey after she's just been saved, and she says, like, that thing wanted me dead. And it's not. I think initially she says he was trying to kill me, and then she says it wanted me dead.
Yeah.
And she can't. She's so uncomfortable grappling with this idea of like, this wasn't like an accident. It wasn't random. This thing came up to me and specifically decided it wanted to kill me. And she's so uncomfortable with that. And it is a very uncomfortable idea. And that one line very efficiently encapsulates just how much of a shock it would be to suddenly be thrown in to be a normal person who is suddenly in the world of Doctor Who and experiencing the Doctor's life, and just the impact that would have on a person. It gets across that whole idea so well.
Yeah,
I really, really enjoyed that.
And actually, I think what this episode brings out very well, actually, is that it's not the fault of it. It's in some senses criticizing or critiquing Rose for not reacting like that. It's like there is something a bit weird and perverse about being in this world and enjoying it,
which is a common theme throughout the Russell T Davies era. That's a thing I think we'll be saying a lot throughout this first season. How many ideas that he develops and expands on as time goes on. In fact, I mean, we'll get to this, but I would argue the entire point of season 2 is it's about getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but Stuart, that's what we do. Season 2 is very happy-go-lucky, and Queen Victoria criticises the Doctor Rose for being so happy-go-lucky, and the whole point of that season is when they get to the finale, and it's the threatiest threat that ever threatened, and it's like, oh, we can't laugh our way through this.
There's no way to get out of it.
And that idea is starting here already. It's already this idea of Rose shouldn't be enjoying this, you are actually in danger. And in a sense that's almost like the origin of a 2-season arc for her, of eventually she will just stumble into a situation that is too severe, and there will be genuine consequences,
because they basically both the Doctor and Rose, they enjoy almost dying. And like you say, at the end of season 2, it gets that point of there's a certain point at which the almost becomes you just die. There's no way out. And I think that is an impressive level of because you where we've contrasted with, say, Chibnall's characterization or lack thereof. But what we did say, I think, with Rose was the episode, not the character. That coming into it, having come off the back of the Chibnall run, there was a comparative thing of even very basic characterization came across as, oh, this is great because it's not because there is actually some characterization.
Yeah.
But I think here we're starting to see characterization that is not merely serviceable, and it is actually very impressive characterization that goes into a multi-series character development and is consistent, and you can look back and go, you see the sort of origins of that in this episode, and how that puts them ultimately in a situation they can't get out of. And actually, what I was kind of surprised by in this episode, and I've never had this watching this episode before, was that I kind of didn't like Rose.
Really? Okay.
But in a good way. Because, I mean, this is the other thing. It's I don't think you should necessarily always like the characters. Even the protagonist should not necessarily always be likable. But particularly at the end, I was I was kind of uncomfortable with the way Rose was just trying to sneak off and leave Jackie and go with the Doctor, and clearly was not in a situation. She was not in a position, clearly, emotionally, where she was prepared to just sit down with Jackie and talk it out and deal with. She was still keeping up that pretense of where Jackie goes in and is just I was wondering whether he drinks. Does he drink? And Rose is packing a bag and going, he drinks, still trying to keep up this facade of, literally, I'm packing a bag, but I'm going to pretend that I'm not obviously leaving. And I felt, and I think this is credit to how well, what's the actress's name that plays Jackie?
Camilla?
Camille.
It begins with a C. I know it's alliterative, but I can't remember. Cordy or something.
It's,
I've never actually said it out loud, so I possibly butchered the pronunciation, but it's something like that.
She is... I cannot praise highly enough her portrayal of Jackie. And I think a lot of the time when people think of Jackie, they think of the kind of her comedic aspect. And she is brilliant for that. But in this episode, I think you really see an incredibly well done emotive side of she genuinely is trying to connect with her daughter on this thing that she doesn't understand. She doesn't get why on earth her daughter wants to be in this dangerous world. It makes no sense whatsoever, but she's trying to understand that. She's like, look, let's have dinner, let's sit down, let's figure it out. And Rose is kind of just throwing that in her face a bit.
Yeah, and it's very believable for someone Rose's age to want to fly the nest and be her own person. You know, like, we're quite young people, so we've we know lots of people, and sort of in our own ways have experienced a sense of, I just want to, I love my family, but I just want to get out of the house, just want to leave. So you can understand it from that point of view. And I had the same reaction initially to you, where I was like, oh, Rose, come on, like, do you have to just, that's your mother? Yeah. But then when the Doctor was talking about, I thought about the superstorm and the plasma storm, and it's like, I mean, he's got a fucking spaceship and a time machine, like, I love my mum dearly, but... And this is exactly what Russell T Davies would say. How could you turn down an opportunity like that? And I think possibly the only issue in the sense of it's good writing, but it's not necessarily making the character a likable person, is that Rose doesn't acknowledge that this is difficult for her mother. But that's just because she's 19. But
I mean, this is what I think. This is where I say it's really well written. And actually, the scene where the Doctor's on the phone, I found that quite uncomfortable as well, because I remember thinking this was like 10 minutes ago. This is not exactly a feat of great mental recall. I was like, it's quite a sort of, in some sense, quite a toxic relationship that Rose and the Doctor have, because she's like, Rose is kind of being like, hey, it's my mum, like, she's trying to play the side of her mother and saying, look, can't you just, it won't be essentially, like, why shouldn't the Doctor just, for the sake of trying to keep things nice and helping smooth things over, come and have dinner, it doesn't take that long. And he's just like, no, I don't do that. And then he pivots into this sales pitch, essentially, of like, oh, well, there's all these things, and it is a bit like
and that's very, I noticed that as well, and that's very core to his character this season. Is he's so much more alien than I remember him being. It's certainly much more alien than David Tennant. I always thought, small tangent, but I always thought that David Tennant's humanness was a byproduct of Russell T Davies really enjoying writing people. But Chris Eccleston shows he can absolutely write an alien who was just like, no, I don't want to have dinner with your family, that's boring, I want to go see a plasma storm. But I think it's also time war and trauma with that. He's scared of connection. And this is that's an important little detail for his overall arc of softening and becoming much more of a person. In fact, I remember, if my memory serves, in the Christmas Invasion, he does join them for Christmas dinner. I'm pretty sure he does. Yeah, which if that's intentional, that's an extremely good sort of small way that he can come full circle and actually sit and have tea with them, where before he outright refused.
I mean, Eccleston's Doctor, I think, is an excellent kind of trauma character. Of he's had the Time War, and the characterization's really good because you see it through these little things rather than it just being like directly, oh, I'm super messed up about the Time War, which you see at points, and in the next episode that's comes to a head. But you see all the ways that kind of trauma leaches out into just the general behaviour and the way he interacts with people, and that he and also that he just kind of wants to be impressive to Rose. He's also forced into kind of admitting some level of feelings in the cabinet room when he's like, oh, there is a way out of here, and has to acknowledge that basically he could lose Rose. He's clearly uncomfortable about admitting that, but he's sort of forced into that situation of thing. And I suppose that is part of him developing into a more human character through his relationship with Rose.
See, it's the little details like that you wouldn't, if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to watch an episode of Doctor Who today, you know, you may not think of that and be like, that's a draw, but those little things, so like this episode may not be one you're going to rewatch all the time, but those little things contribute to an overall sense of, you know, the season and the strength of the season. And, you know, I've mentioned before, I think this season, possibly more than any other, it really builds episode to episode, and I think this is another example of that with all the characterization.
It is a very tightly done season of there are episodes that, and I would say probably on the whole, I don't rewatch individual episodes from this season very often. Even probably Empty Child I have rewatched a handful of times. Dalek I have rewatched a handful of times.
Father's Day as well.
Father's Day, yes. But like outside of that, you know, certainly, I mean, we said it in the episode when we were discussing it, Unquiet Dead. It's not one that I'd be like, oh, I really, really want to rewatch that. You know, even Rose, as much as it serves very well as a pilot, I wouldn't be like, I'm going to rewatch that loads. This two-parter, again, so as standalone episodes, I think, in contrast to other seasons, there are probably more standalone episodes where I'd be like, I'll rewatch those. But as a season overall, like you say, I'm not sure that there is another season of Doctor Who that is as tightly wound up in a narrative as this first season.
I feel like some people may say as a counterpoint, like, oh, season 6, it has the whole overarching narrative, and it's like, all season 6 has, I would say asterisk, to my memory, I've not rewatched it, I don't like it very much, but all season 6 has is just, oh my god, that's the alien from this time, and you know, blah, blah, blah. It's a whole lot of plot and a whole lot of, oh, this name, remember this name from this episode, and this thing from this episode. It's not actually building character arcs over the course of the season.
Incidental rather than...
it's just a straight line of what is... I mean, the story is itself already convoluted, but then it gets broken up and shuffled about all over the place, and you see little fragments of it at different times. But it's not actually building overall. You're just getting the story non-chronologically.
Which is not the same thing as a narrative build.
Exactly. This is a full narrative build. And so, in that sense, I do think this is possibly... that's right. Even like Flux, which is literally one unbroken timeline, is still less of a...
Because it doesn't... that you can have a plot that technically does connect and is a continuous plot, but that's a different thing. Is arguably a prerequisite for, but is a different thing from a thematic and a character, you know, a narrative build. Of actually having themes that are explored and come back and
I think actually the strongest way to write a season is to make it so that there are very few episodes where it's like you have to watch this one, otherwise you literally won't know what's going on. Because there aren't really many episodes like that in the season, but if you don't watch all of them, you will miss the context. And exactly, you will, like, you couldn't. In some senses, you could say, oh, you could watch Rose and then maybe Dalek and then Parting of the Ways. You'd understand logistically what's happening, but you would miss out on all of the depth of characterization and all the build-up that had led to that. You know, it's more subtle than just, you know, what are the Daleks? You know, what is Satellite 5? Who's the Dalek? It's deeper than that.
And that is, I think, Doctor Who at its best, because Doctor Who... One of the, frankly, many unique challenges that Doctor Who has as a show is it is almost... I think it is almost unique in... Certainly at this period of time in the early 2000s, you know, where it's... In terms of, you know, whatever you think of the relative quality of writing, relative quality of the show generally, showrunners, whatever, in terms of... cultural significance, early 2000s Doctor Who under Russell T Davies is the peak of the show in that regard. And so in this period of time, even more so than at any other time, certainly at least in the reboot, it's having to contend with casual viewers, in a lot of cases very casual viewers, who may miss an episode, may miss several episodes, may just tune in for the specials, the finales, whatever. And also people who are going to saddos like us, who are going to religiously watch every
episode and then talk about it for an hour.
Over a decade later.
Got 15 years.
Yes.
Over 15 years. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. Yeah, that's a quality I always admired about Doctor Who, but I've just sort of forgotten how easy it was to miss a bit of it, to just but equally how much you got out of it for watching all of it. Because when I was a kid, actually, I missed the Human Nature two-parter. A grave mistake on my part, which obviously establishes the fob watch. I completely understood what was happening in Utopia. I could follow that story, and I got everything.
It's a widget that's got the, it's totally nice to have the extra backstory, but ultimately it's a widget.
But then equally, if you've seen that, because it took me a little while to catch up, obviously. So, but I could still follow it. But if you've seen that, obviously, not only does that mean you've seen, top 3 Doctor Who episode of all time, but also that moment where he takes out the watch, punches
immediately,
you in the face. Exactly. And I feel like there's a temptation nowadays with because shows like Game of Thrones with all their big surprises, and with social media and everything, everything's so big, and everyone's like, you want everyone to be talking about every episode when it airs. People stuff so much into TV shows, and they want them to be so big and explosive every single time. I think there is a lot to be said for a show where it's like, if you watch all of it, you will absolutely get the full experience, but you don't have to. You can miss bits of it,
and that you get in some instances more of a slow burn build of things, and more of a sort of episode to episode, very subtle character developments, where if you watch, because if you watch as we has done, if you watch Unquiet Dead and then these two-parters, you wouldn't say, Rose and the Doctor are really fundamentally different characters between the two. There are things that are drawn out more for the purposes of the themes that are being explored in this episode, but it's very subtle, any difference between them. But if you compare Rose with Parting of the Ways, and certainly then if you compare Rose to Doomsday, there's a big jump. But
but it's very hard to pin down any singular moment when this is when she
happens, changed. I mean, there was that very particular thing of watching Doctor Who at the time that this aired, and with Tennant as well, that I think by the time of Matt Smith kind of went away, which is that when we were kids watching this, you didn't really meaningfully have the internet.
And iPlayer only held the episodes for a week.
And so, I remember you would go into school, and on the playground it would be discuss the on the Monday or whatever, discuss the most recent episode of Doctor Who, and it was a big deal. I mean, that's also something I think that people maybe forget a little bit about Doctor Who now, is it was a big deal.
I was actually, for the people listening to this, I work at a school, I work with primary school children, and there is only one kid there who likes Doctor Who, and I was saying to him, it was like, I remember when I was your age, literally everyone liked Doctor Who. The way everyone's talking about Stranger Things and Fortnite and all that, that's how they all talked about Doctor Who. Everyone had an opinion on it, you know, rather than having to explain to people what it even was.
And
we had the cards, we had little trading cards that you'd swap on the playground and everything. It was,
you say had past tense, like I don't still have them.
I've still got my folder as
well. I still got all the action figures, and I definitely don't spend an unhealthy amount of time thinking about this show.
Not at all.
But no, I think it's interesting. Now talking about Doctor Who, that people perhaps forget, even perhaps if they were around at the time, because of how it's developed. And I don't think this is necessarily actually the show's fault, because obviously cultural moments move on, and I think it happened to hit a particular time and all the rest of it, alongside obviously being extremely well written under Davies and all the rest of it. I don't really consider this necessarily a critique of the show, that it is no longer the cultural peak that it was.
Nothing could maintain that for 17 years across 13 seasons. That's just impossible.
But I think it is easy enough to forget because of where it is now. There was a period of time where Doctor Who was just like the biggest thing on TV.
David Tennant's fake regeneration made the news. It literally made the news.
and I can still, like, to some relative degree of vividness, recall going onto the playground and immediately, because at the time at school, as much as obviously we say everyone was a fan of Doctor Who, not everyone was an equal fan of Doctor Who. I was still the Doctor Who fan at school, and so when I remember going onto the playground after the fake out regeneration and having people come up to me being like, "What did you see, Doctor Who? The fake? What's happening?" And I remember feeling like genuinely like slightly betrayed by David Tennant of like being like, he's regenerating, like, because again, because you don't have the internet or like the big news and everything. You had no way of knowing that wasn't a real regeneration, really, as a kid, especially if you didn't see, because obviously they would have in the news said, there's going to be a new Doctor, but as a kid you didn't read the news, so even if it had been, you had no concept of that. And I mean, we've discussed this a couple of times, that it would be so great for Doctor Who to do an actual regeneration just midway through a season without any fanfare. I don't think you could do it.
I think what you could do, again, context of viewers, I want to write for Doctor Who when I'm older, however realistic that is. I think what you could easily do, you could do a finale where the cliffhanger of part 1 is the Doctor regenerating, and then part 2 he's asleep, like in Christmas Invasion. So it's like everything's gone to hell, Doctor gets killed and regenerates, and it's like, crap, we've got to, we, the companions, have to step up to the plate and do that, because that could be really good for them, and then also, that would be very tense. So yes, I do think there is a way to do that. I mean, because it's I probably shouldn't publish my ideas. No one nick that. That's mine.
Well, we have evidence of prior art now, so
yes, we do. Yes, if there's ever a regeneration,
we will sue.
I will sue you.
I mean, because this thing is, Doctor Who has that really unique ability to kill the main character, which is something that virtually no other show has available to it. As much as like, Doctor Who's not the only show that's ever done that, and even in things like, or media in general, obviously, even as much as like Superman obviously can't stay dead. They have killed Superman before, but crucially he can't stay dead. Like, he does have to come back, whereas Doctor Who, the specific iteration of Doctor Who, can stay dead, which is virtually unique in all media. And you could do more with that. Anyway, we're supposed to be talking about
that pure hypothetical. I sorry, I'm going to stay on this. There's one little thing I want to say, just going back to the point you made about when you talk about the excitement with the fake regeneration. Obviously that's with Stolen Earth, which is where Davros appeared. And I'd seen Genesis of the Daleks because I was, I was like you, I was the Doctor Who kid. Yeah. So I was like, I'm going to watch the old one because I'm such a fan. And so when Davros was on screen, I was like, I know who that is. And then I was telling people about it. I had kids who I never spoke to, asking me questions about Davros and his history. And I made stuff up as well. Like, obviously he dies at Genesis of the Daleks, and then he's back here and he's fought a whole Tyra in between. So I made a bunch of stuff up about all the things he did in the Time War and things like that. But it was just so much fun.
I mean, and Doctor Who was of that level of just everybody. Even if you didn't watch it at all, you still watched the Christmas specials.
Yes, whole country watched the Christmas specials.
It is, because that was just the event. It's part of Christmas. Queen's Speech, Doctor Who special. That's Christmas. And by the time you get to Matt Smith, I think the whole kind of cultural landscape had shifted. Again, not as a fault of the show, but you've got the internet being, in 2010, 2011, the internet is much more of a prevalent thing that the average person is using. you have that slight decline in the sort of massive cultural relevance of Doctor Who.
And I think also Moffat just generally cared less, and this is not a critique of him, this is a perfectly valid writing decision, but he just cared less about making it a cultural event.
Sure.
He wanted to explore Doctor Who as a show, whereas Russell Davies was like, I'm making a TV program for Britain to watch, you know, and that was the very key difference.
And that,
them.
I think, is you couldn't do that the other way round, because to reboot Doctor Who, you had to make it a cultural icon again. Because, I mean, you know, Doctor Who was a cultural icon with the classic series, obviously declined and came off television. In order, you couldn't really reboot Doctor Who without committing to making it a cultural icon again, because otherwise it would just become, you know, a cult following, maybe do a season and that's it. You know, which conceivably could have happened.
Well, that's what they were planning with this one. Actually, they had no guarantee of a second season. So, which again is why I think it is so strong.
I mean, and you can totally see that as like, oh, we're going to reboot the 80s. Well, I mean, obviously originally 60s, but you know, 80s sci-fi show that by the end of its run was very much a cult following show. Like, that's not an obvious success story.
No, definitely not.
And you know, it's super easily Doctor Who could have been a one series reboot with some degree of success and becomes an interesting documentary topic for you know,
much like the movie.
And the movie. I don't know. Have you seen the?
I still haven't.
I have. I watched it a little while ago, and it's fine.
We're now reviewing the Doctor Who movie. In our World War III episode, we will now review the Doctor. Only one of us has seen. I'm going to make a cup of tea rather than talk.
This has just become a 5-hour ramble about. Like, it's basically, it's fine, and that's the thing, is like, it's fine. That's maybe I don't know whether that's a contra. I think a lot of people think it's quite bad. I think it's fine. I enjoyed elements of it. Paul McGann, I think, still is a great Doctor. I'd love to see Paul McGann more in the main series of Doctor Who, but it failed to have that impact that you would need to resurrect Doctor Who, because, you know, as much as I enjoy the classic era of Doctor Who, a resurrection was what was required to bring Who back from where it had been put. Anyway, this episode.
Christ, I can't even remember what we've already covered.
So we kind of talked about Rose's characterization. I think what would be relevant to talk about, and because you brought this up pretty much immediately when we started watching the second episode, Harriet Jones, because we somehow
did, and I was about to forget to talk about her again. So Harriet Jones is great in the first episode. Just very nicely characterized. I don't know the name of the actress who plays her, but she just always does a fantastic job.
Flawless.
And then in this episode, like, it's so weird because I'm not sure she's actually at all necessary to the plot, but I just really like having her there. She's a very good character, very believable, very likable. And again, another instance of a mundane person being sort of swept up into the Doctor's life
and dealing with it.
In this instance, rising to the occasion. And I think she justifies her presence enough with the bit where she's like, you know, I'm the only elected representative and I will make the decision. And it's interesting because I think, again, at the time, no plans for future seasons, they can't have known that she was going to come back. So when the Doctor is saying, like, Prime Minister for 3 successive terms, I think what her character was meant to represent was this idea of the Doctor's from the future, he'll bump into people, famous people before they're famous. But it kind of takes on... I think that comes across less on a rewatch because we now know her to be a recurring character who does not go on to do those things because of the Doctor. And I think... So that makes you think, okay, well, she's not actually that important in the grand scheme of the human race. We know she's not. So what is she doing here? What is actually the point? And I think the point is just... And and that could have easily reduced her to nothing, you know, if the point is just to be like, oh, the Doctor met someone famous before she was famous, isn't that cute? And you don't even have that anymore, because we now know that doesn't happen. But that could have easily made her pointless, but she's just so likeable.
She's likeable, and she is so strongly characterized that she is a memorable thing. Because, I mean, you could have... I mean, I don't think it would have been as strong an episode, because part of it does rely on the personal connection. But you could have done Christmas Invasion without it being Harriet Jones as Prime Minister. I mean, there are aspects that wouldn't work, like I say, because the personal connection does play into it a bit. But, you know, when you have a character that works that well, you may as well bring her back where it makes sense to do so.
And this episode sort of retroactively becomes setting up of her really quite strong character arc of, you know, sort of being inspired by the Doctor, challenging the Doctor, and then ultimately deciding, no, I was right to make that decision. And again, that's one of the things where this podcast offers an interesting perspective, because I don't think that's obviously not her intention, the intention when she was first written, but this episode still works.
Because she's so strongly characterized.
Exactly. And that's actually quite... I'm thinking about this on the spot. That's quite amazing, actually, that she, I think, was just intended to be a one-off, you know, little funny thing.
Yeah.
The Doctor is a time traveller, basically. But was so well written that whole moment was kind of retconned to, no, this is the introduction to a character who will then have a short but strong arc across 4 seasons.
And a pretty pivotal role in a finale.
Exactly.
And serves as a moral counterpoint to the Doctor. And serves as an excellent moral counterpoint, because she's not wrong. I mean, neither's the Doctor. I mean, that's the thing. That's what makes her a great moral counterpoint, ultimately, is both of their perspectives are legitimate, depending on how you want to frame it.
And you can see the germ of, like, the mentality that would lead to her to find the Doctor blowing up the cigarettes here, when she's like, Doctor, this isn't your decision. I am the only elected. I'm the elected representative. I call the shots. And she says that, puts her foot down, as I'm not budging on this. You know, this is my decision.
She is not like, she does not go, oh, well, you know, maybe I should...
She doesn't ask for permission.
Yeah, she's just saying, look, the simple fact is that, I'm the only one with any measure... You know, if you care at all about democracy, then, and she's not wrong in that regard. I mean, you can quibble the point, but it's a legitimate point she's making. You could come up from a different angle, but... so that kind of characterization... on top of the fact that she is just likeable, she has those fun... I mean,
she's very funny.
She's very funny.
The show as a whole is very funny, actually, in a very natural way.
Yes, and that's, I think, part of what makes this episode work really well, perhaps in slight contrast to the first part, is it is very... I don't like to say effortlessly funny, because obviously a lot of effort went into making it effortlessly funny, but it comes across as effortlessly funny. And particularly Harriet Jones is very, you know, her... I mean, there's even the great... When the Slitheen hunts Rose and Harriet and traps them in that room, and Harriet's hiding behind the clothing screen... even as much as she's terrified for her life, she takes some personal affront at the way she's been described by the alien that's trying to kill her.
As it, like, she's so strongly characterized as somebody who has the utmost respect for herself, because we have to sort of talk about the last episode, because we forgot to talk about her in that one, when she's like, a spaceship just crash landed into London. Yes, that's all well and good, but, you know, these hospitals need funding. You know, it's an issue I care about very deeply, and by Christ, I'm going to make you care about it, like, too.
She's not unlikable in that regard. She's not like... She doesn't come across as pushy, overbearing, or anything like that. I think she's likable as a character because and looking at her as an overall character in terms of where she comes back as well, in spite of arguable flaws, she is a very principled character. And you see that in this episode. You know, she clearly is coming from a very clear
and she is trying to do the best for people.
Yes.
You know, like her pushing for the whole thing with like the hospitals and stuff. It's not because she's too stupid to see there's bigger things to worry about. You know, she justifies it like there are still normal people with normal problems, you know. And she does say like, can you just put it on the next agenda just quickly? It'll take you 2 minutes to just put it there.
And that's an interesting point you raised, because if she was being written as stupid character who's too stupid to realise that there are more important things going on, she'd still be pushing the hospitals even when there's an existential threat to the planet. But she doesn't, because at that point she's like, okay, there is an immediate crisis that needs attention. But at the point where she's still trying to get it tabled, all it is first contact, and she's like, well, that's lovely, that's great and everything. And also it's clear that she has, you know, she goes, that's great, I think that's probably great, like she's not entirely sure, but it is at that point not a crisis. So she's like, well, we still need to get on with governing the country. But if she was being done as a comedic, incompetent character, she'd be popping up going like, oh, but what about the hospitals when like Downing Street's been blown up? But she doesn't.
I mean, there's only so many ways we can say she's so well written.
She's great. I love Harriet Jones.
So well performed as well.
Yes.
And I think only other thing I want to say is that the bit when they're narrowing down what planet the Slitheen are from, and she's like, when they fart, if you're pardon them, it doesn't smell like a fart. If you're pardon, I fucking pissed myself.
It's so good. It's so good because she again so strongly characterized as this very proper person that she's so tied to, like, and again where the doctor is just doing a quip of going, have a drink, Harriet, and she goes, you pass it to the left first. like etiquette is so important to her that she doesn't even forget it in a life and death situation. And I think that's where the comedy of this episode works really well, is it's that kind of comedy that comes from characterization. Like the Slitheen are very strongly characterized. There's, you know, and it's within the, we're having a sort of family reunion, essentially, the Slitheen are having, and so there is this sort of, come through this way, and we've got and if you just want to go through, they talk to one another how normal people talk to their family, at a thing of going like, and if you just want to go through here, and
then when you've got like the whole image of this great big green alien,
it's great. And Harriet Jones similarly is like believable as the character, but also funny.
Like the comedy in this, there's almost no jokes. In fact, I'm not sure there are any jokes. Like, there are no jokes that if you take them out of context would still be funny. And I think that's the difference between the way Moffat and Russell T Davies write jokes. A lot of Moffat jokes, I could say them to you and they would still be funny. Like in most contexts. Obviously, that depends on the specific joke, but you get what I mean. Whereas in this case, this is just the characters being the characters, and they're just funny people, not because they're saying funny things necessarily, although in cases they are. But it's utterly unique to them as people. It's like when you're hanging out with friends and you're saying things that aren't necessarily jokes. Like, you wouldn't put them in a stand-up comedy routine, but you're laughing because you know each other. Like when you talk about buying a new waistcoat, that's not funny, but it's because I know you and I know you buy a lot of waistcoats, and so I chuckle.
I've been exposed online.
It's that very comedic. It's that very natural, real, relatable comedy.
And it's the things that are like, you know, if you are laughing with your friends, it's where people sometimes try and relate a thing that they were laughing with their friends about, and it's just not funny because in and of itself it's not funny. And even if you were trying to relate, like, say passing the what is it, port? Maybe, I don't know.
No idea.
Probably
gin?
Port. No, it's not gin.
No.
It's the colour's wrong for gin. I'm pretty sure it's port because you pass port to
it's alcohol.
Yeah, you pass port to the left first. Anyway, that if you're just explaining that of like, so there's the main character and there's another character, and he tries to pass her the alcohol, and she says, "Oh, you pass it to the left first." Yeah. That's not funny.
That's exactly my point. Exactly. It's only because you know Harriet Jones, and it's just like, that's such a Harriet thing to say.
So Harriet Jones, like, and the whole bit of her always going, Harriet Jones, MP Flydale North, and that they carry that on when she's Prime Minister, makes them. It's so clear how well they understand the character, and it's also like such a lack of pretentiousness with Harriet Jones.
There's not an ounce of arrogance.
No, she's not like, I'm the Prime Minister. She's just like, that's my position, and people should know.
She is true. I think that's what ultimately saves her, even when she's doing things that may be morally questionable or potentially irritating, is there is no ego on that woman. No. She is just trying to help people and doesn't for 1 second assume that you know or care who she is.
It's utter conviction. I mean, that's something to draw some real life parallels, because obviously she's a politician. You do get that sometimes with politicians who are otherwise utterly abhorrent. Given the option between two utterly abhorrent politicians, people generally kind of like, you do get people going like, well, at least they had principles. Whereas if somebody's abhorrent just because they don't believe in anything, that's somehow worse to people than if people are horrible at least from principles. And Harriet Jones isn't horrible. Like, she makes mistakes, and there are things where you can be like, that is morally questionable, but she's clearly not at a baseline a horrible person. But even so, because everything is done with utter conviction, you never get a sense that she is doing manoeuvring or trying to get herself in a good position. It's not for personal gain, which is perhaps the least realistic character.
Sadly so.
On that point, with where we can quickly get through, because we haven't actually touched on the political allegory of this story.
Oh yeah, well, I just would like to express my gratitude that we're going back to times before Doctor Who forced horrible left-wing politics down our throats. Just
disgraceful.
Yeah, it's really nice to watch a silly episode about a bunch of evil politicians manufacturing a crisis so that they can,
justify military action,
start a war for their own personal gain.
Just real apolitical stuff.
I mean, I think frankly, do we need to talk about it? I think the parallel is obvious, and B, I think we've taken the piss out of people who think Doctor Who only got political when a woman became the Doctor enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think it bears... it's worth mentioning, even just in passing, but certainly they're not... It's not subtle. It's, it's 9/11, Blair...
but also, it doesn't badger on about constantly.
Yeah.
Like, whenever Chibnall is doing a political allegory, he will bring up the parallels explicitly at every available opportunity. This has sort of broader similarities, and then the scene where he's directly addressing the nation, and obviously the quick line from Rose, what they did last time. And then from then on, it's like, right, you get it,
It's integrated within the story such that you could watch it, be completely ignorant of the political allegory,
as I was as a child.
It would still, when I was a kid, there was no way I was going like, insightful commentary on the Iraq War.
The Blair government was.
But it doesn't. It's not. Let's stop the entire plot to deliver a piece to camera. Not that would ever happen.
Also, if Chibnall were writing this, they wouldn't even be critiquing Blair's actions.
No, they'd be going, this is good.
They would have a Blair stand-in who just said who would quote lots of direct lines from Blair, and people are like, you didn't talk like Tony Blair, but he wouldn't say or do anything that meaningfully critiqued his action, Tony Blair's actions.
He would just be Tony Blair.
He would just be Tony Blair, sort of standing around. And then the episode would end with him making a perfectly morally justifiable decision that everyone said was bad because he was Tony Blair. This is now an arachnid to the UK review.
This is and it's not. I think it is an interesting comparison point that I think sometimes people think that the critique of the Chibnall political stories is in their overtness, and it's not, because this episode is pretty overt. It's not subtle by any means.
It's that they have nothing to say.
There's no commentary.
The problem with Chibnall episodes isn't that they suddenly got political, is that they're not political enough. And the only one that has a coherent point is Kablam, which says Amazon good, actually.
It's actually it's status quo actually fine.
People who want to unionize are essentially terrorists.
Whereas. Yeah, so it's it serves a point, I think, Davies in particular, because he's generally not that subtle, almost a direct comparison of, like, you can be overt, just have something to say,
and also have an interesting story built to go on.
You
know, like Praxeus is the whole thing about, you know, microplastics and stuff, and it's literally just going from location to location, being like,
look at all the plastic.
Look at all exactly. It's just fucking crazy. That's it. It's not even difficult.
No,
you know, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I'm not asking for much.
Like, this episode is absolute. Like baseline, like Blair, Iraq, 9/11 critique. This is, you know, it's not particularly in depth. It's largely just pointing at the thing and going, "Hey, look at that!
Yeah,
isn't that kind of a bit messed up?" It doesn't even, it doesn't even really explore the implications of that. It doesn't in the way that, say, you know, later on, say in series 4, where you have the literal actual descent of the UK into fascism and the deportation of people to concentration camps.
I remember I read a review of that from some absolute pillock who was like, you know, more unsubtle social commentary from Davies, they're taking the immigrants away, where? And I was just like, I mean, at the time I was reading it, I was like, I mean, that's what they would do, though. Now I'm almost at a point where I can say that is literally what that is. Yeah, no, like, Jesus fucking Christ. I mean, that was a little too depressing. I have to be honest. I'd quite like to move on from that. God,
so the funny farting aliens.
Yeah, the farting aliens trying to nuke the planet.
That reminds me of something you commented on when we were watching the episode. The Buffalo password security thing.
Now, I don't need a lot of realism from Doctor Who, and so I'm one of those people who, like, the way I see it is, like, the story is made up, so if you need to take shortcuts to get to the interesting bit, I'm fine with that. My suspension of disbelief, as I said, is my threshold is very, very low. The fucking unit, you know, the subsection of the UN that is designed to handle aliens, the password is Buffalo, and the only security measure, as far as I can tell, is that you have to repeat it. Like, I just give a string of letters, just even if it was capital A Q 4756 lowercase g. I mean, obviously there would still be more security than that, but that's at least a complicated password. This is just Buffalo, and there's not even any numbers.
I mean, you know, so I'm kind of interestingly, I'm kind of in two minds about this, which is that as somebody with some level of familiarity with security systems and computing generally, it's not completely unbelievable that would be the level of security.
That's a good point, actually.
Because I think I'm right in saying that there was a period of time when some aspects of the US nuclear system were still using default passwords. There is some genuinely embarrassingly poor security generally and in government. Having said that, it did still feel a bit like the notion that you could access the ability to fire missiles through a web browser from any computer, and that you just need to type in Buffalo a few times.
See, the whole web browser thing didn't bother me, because I understand so little about hacking. I'm totally okay if in a TV show someone taps some keys and they get into the database or, you know, the system or whatever. That's fine with me. I think actually I'd have been happier with it if it just been like, right, Mickey, follow my instructions, and then it cut to we're in, like that. A joke about, like, Buffalo is like, seriously? It's like, yep. And there's some sort of joke about like, they just didn't bother. The password is crap or something like that.
But I mean, I think the way I would have probably done it is just have the Doctor list off probably Greek characters, you know, Delta, Alpha, you know, because that's got some that's a classic vibe of sort of military thing, because it's, like you say, it's a shortcut. The thing with any sort of hacking or computer security within media is you fundamentally cannot depict it accurately unless it's the thing that the show is about, because largely it's an unexciting thing. I mean, you're not going to want to watch, like, oh yeah, so I put in the tool that's the tool that's going to break it, and now we have to sit here for a day while it tries to glitch some work around some backdoor or something. I was
watching a video from some YouTubers that I watch who got hacked. And they were explaining how it happened, and it was so mundane. Like, he got an email, a very official-looking email. It was like, download this thing, and then you could start whatever. And he downloaded it, and the application worked and everything. It was very simple, but it worked. And there was a virus attached to that just got his passwords, and then logged into all the accounts it could with those passwords. And then the guy just deleted stuff. I was like, that's dull.
Yeah, I mean,
all he actually did was sent an email. Then once he got the passwords, he logged into some accounts and just clicked delete a few times.
I mean, the vast majority of quote unquote hacking is just social engineering. It's relying on the fact that humans do dumb things and doing that. But it's certainly not a fatal problem for this episode.
I just thought it was funny,
but it is fun. Yeah,
it's a thing that gets sort of lamented a lot when people talk about it. I think people, again, like with the farting off the Celine, I think people overemphasize how bad it is, but it still ain't great. I just wanted to mention it.
It's also, I mean, I love the design of the unit website. It's so early 2000. Well, it's all
every website was horrible looking back then.
And it's also like embossed, sort of beveled edges and strange icons. I kind of want to. This is I kind of want to try and recreate that website now. Probably somebody's done that already, but I might have a go.
I'm trying to think sort of what else to mention, because I think I'm trying to think if I have really any major problems, actually.
I think it's a very solid episode.
Yeah, I think
very solid.
There's two little things I want to mention. The first is that it makes sense. This one's a lot better, because my understanding is that the idea for this came when Russell T Davies had the idea of aliens in Downing Street.
Right.
So he would have started from this episode. Yeah. And episode 1.
How do we get them there?
Exactly. Because we even said that in the last review. We were like, all of this seems to just be getting the Doctor into Downing Street. And I think that is probably even more the case now, because once they're in Downing Street, all the fun stuff happens. Yeah. It's really, really good. And the other very small thing that I wanted to mention, I have now forgotten, so feel free to talk and I will try and remember it.
I mean, I think the first episode does just feel like a series of sort of contrivances to get this episode established. I don't know how much that bothers me, there is there is always that sense with a serial program that not every single episode can be an absolute barnstormer. Mm-hmm. Could the first episode have been better? Yeah, I think so. And I think the things we discussed about it in terms of the tone, fixing some of those things would have improved it at a fairly significant degree. But it's not an episode where you're going to watch it and go, I'm going to give up on Doctor Who because of
absolutely
this.
Not. And I think my positive impression of this episode that I mentioned, of this story, I should say, that I mentioned in the last episode, is because I watched them back to back. So it would have worked a lot better going straight from setup to payoff, and also I would have had this as my lasting impression. I remember the thing I was going to say. It's a very small thing, but it's when the Doctor is talking about his life, explaining it to Harriet Jones, and he says, this is what I do, I just make a decision because no one else will. The way the Doctor is characterised in the Davies era is so it's so heroic in a way that isn't preachy, so it gets in your face at times, but ultimately it does just boil down to that, the way he describes it there. He just
He finds himself in situations,
and he just makes a decision.
Yeah.
He doesn't let bad things happen. I was going to say, if he knows he can do something, even if he doesn't know he can, he always tries. And I just remember when I was younger, obviously I'd have been far too young to articulate why, but the Doctor was easily like my favourite hero.
Oh yeah,
I absolutely loved him, and I loved pretending to be the Doctor, and all of that stuff. And I think this episode sort of made me realise why. It's because the Doctor, he doesn't have powers necessarily, but he does. He arrives in every situation, and he thinks, what can I do? I'm going to take charge, and I'm going to get everyone through this as best as I possibly can. And it's so, like Superman is a hero because he has all these powers, and he kind of, a lot of that he has to grapple with using them to be a good person. The Doctor's the opposite. The Doctor's a good person first and foremost. And I don't know, I don't even really have a point necessarily, but just like, it's so, because it's not battering you over the head with it, and it is shown so clearly through his actions, it is genuinely quite inspiring. He's a genuinely very inspiring character.
I mean, the Doctor is my favourite character in fiction, and like you saying, as a child, was an absolutely a hero to me. And I think there's a later in Capaldi's run. And I think this is one of the reasons that Capaldi's my favourite Doctor, and so one of, if not my favourite lines from Doctor Who is the "without hope, without witness, without reward," because to me that does encapsulate the Doctor, that you do good for the sake of it being good,
exactly.
Not because you're hoping for a reward, not because other people are watching, not because it'll even work. I mean, and obviously you have Capaldi's great speech to Missy and the Master in his finale two-parter that encapsulates that attitude of just like, look, I'm here, I've got to do something, and it might not help even, but I can't just not do anything.
Exactly. And like sort of seeing that despite their different interpretations of the character, both Russell T Davies and Moffat so clearly understand the Doctor in that way, I think that goes a long way to explaining why he truly does feel like the same character across three generations. And just that whole idea, I think the thing that stood out to me particularly was when he talks about how because no one else will, and it's that whole idea of, it's not, I'm going to step up because I'm really clever and I know lots of things. It's, I'm going to do it because no one else is. And it's that idea of anyone could do that. Anyone could just be like, okay, well, no one else... Because there's so many times in real life where people find themselves standing by and watching.
Yeah.
And the Doctor's just being like, just go and do it. Go and try and help because no one else will. And I think that's so applicable to real life. And again, so inspiring when I was a child of just like, well, I could just, if I'm seeing something that is upsetting me, I don't have to just sit here and be like, oh, that thing is bad. I can stand up to it and try and fight back.
And I mean, quite a lot of the time you do get that kind of response of, well, you're not going to necessarily succeed in improving things or whatever, but like, you might as well try, like, and it's still good in and of itself to do that, even if it doesn't fully succeed. I mean, this is, I think, what there is that Moffat quote about the Doctor where I can't remember it verbatim, but
when they made this hero, they didn't give him a gun or a warship or a weapon. They gave him a screwdriver to fix things, a police box to call for help, and two hearts to love twice as much.
And that is kind of, and I think, like you said, you have to give for whatever you think of their respective tenures. I do think both Moffat and Davies do fundamentally understand the character of the Doctor. Whether they always successfully execute on that is another thing, but I think they do get the character.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And on that note, have you anything else to add?
Maybe small things. Like I could talk a tiny bit about Mickey, but I think there are probably better episodes to do that. I may as well now. I've started. I found the way he was sort of getting bullied by the Doctor a little sort of in the first episode, just in the sense of I'm not sure this is really warranted, but I like that it pays off, and again sets up a very strong arc for him over the course of this season and the next. I think he's a very good character, very believable, and like I said, I do like that the Doctor softens a bit on him and offers him a chance, but he knows he can't do it.
There's a similar point in in Rose, and we discussed this in the episode about Rose, where in the lift you have Rose making deductions about, well, they've got to be students because etc., and the Doctor's like, knows she's wrong but respects that with the information she has available. That's a thing, and that's, you kind of see that as the first point where the Doctor starts to pay a little bit more attention to her. In this episode, Mickey makes the observation of it's a weird way to invade, to put the world on high alert, and the Doctor kind of goes, good point.
Exactly. He kind of realises that he's wrong, and I think he does him a favour at the end, not just by inviting him, but when Rose is like, oh, can he come on board, he takes the blame. Like, no, he's not having him, I don't want him. He could have easily been like, he doesn't want to come, but he tries to...
coward.
Yeah, but or not even just that, he could have said it neutrally, but like, no, I'm going to spare you any potential embarrassment, and I'm going to be a dickhead, so that, you know...
because he has a level of respect for him now that he didn't before.
Exactly, I'm going to fully take this away from you and put it all, any potential negative feelings onto me. Which a lovely little bit of writing there.
It's a solid little thing, and like you say, I do think there is that bit in the first episode of you kind of thinking a bit, it's a bit unnecessary how mean the Doctor's being, but it does set up the payoff, and I think overall that's the dynamic of these two episodes. The first episode suffers a little bit from being largely a mechanical setup for this episode, but the payoff is very, very solid, so you can kind of forgive it.
And that's my overall impression. Just extremely good fun with all the stuff in Downing Street, really good character work with Jackie and Mickey, and then at the end that all culminates in making a very strong point, very strong statement about this season and the themes of this season, with the threat that Rose is under and her decision to keep travelling with the Doctor despite that, and of course just contributing to broader Doctor Who themes of the type of hero that the Doctor is, and just back on form, I'd say. Not that the last episode was terrible or anything, but this is back to the surprisingly very high, much higher than I remember it being standard of the first season.
For sure. And on that note, I guess we'll end this episode and anticipate the next episode, which is Dalek.
Join us next time for what will likely be 5-hour episode
of us just raving about how fantastic it is, but maybe we'll hate it. Maybe there'll be a great revelation that Dalek's actually terrible. Goodbye.